What is up, aviators, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So last week I gave a little bit of an introduction video to myself, where I came from, my flying career so far, and all of that good stuff. Kind of what I want this channel to be, and where I kind of want to take it, and kind of want to see what happens. So to kickstart all of that, I wanted to first make a video about becoming a private pilot. Whether you are a pilot already, maybe you're a sport pilot, a student pilot, a recreational pilot, or you don't have any pilot experience at all, or even if you're already a commercial pilot, maybe a CFI, whatever you are, this video is here to help you. Whether that's to help get refreshed on some things, maybe you need to hear some things again, or you want to learn because maybe you don't know. Maybe you want to take your first steps at becoming a private pilot, or maybe you want to eventually get to the airlines and you want to know what your first steps are to even doing that. That is what we are going to cover in today's video. I have a little bit of a lesson plan planned out. Today we're going to have some things that are going to be covered that's going to help you learn. So we have actually a couple of regulations as well as some acronyms that we're going to be going over. And that's why this video can be very helpful to anyone wherever you're at in their training, or even if you're done with your training. Like myself, it's going to help keep me refreshed. With all that being said, let's get into today's video. We're talking about what it takes and what you need to do to become a private pilot. All right, so let's first talk about what a private pilot is. Something that I think is really funny, and that I thought was funny throughout all of my training, was whenever I told somebody that I was either getting my private pilot's license or I was a private pilot, they would always tell me, let me know when you're flying like Travis Kelce around in a private jet or something. Um, and at first, before I even knew, that's what I thought it was too. You know, become a private pilot and you can fly private jets. But unfortunately, that's not how the FAA works, and you can't just get your private pilot license and go fly Travis Kelce around the world. So let's talk about what a private pilot actually is. A private pilot, you can think of the word private a little bit more in the terms of something like military, or even something like a sailor. When you're a private, you kind of have a little bit of a lower status, you know? Not that you're low, but you do have a little bit of a lower license or status than somebody who's higher than you. So, if you want to fly Travis Kelce around the world, this is your first step to getting there. Doesn't mean you can necessarily do it yet, though. Having a private pilot license means you just have your private pilot's license. So, how do you get your private pilot's license, and what are some things that you can do, and what are some things that you can't do? In order to get your private pilot's license, we have to open up our book of regulations. We call this thing the FAR-AIM. This book has the longest list of regulations, and it has procedures in there and everything to help us as pilots and help the lawyers for pilots to be able to do things correctly and to do things safely. Now, you already heard me use the term FAA. If you don't know what that means, that is the Federal Aviation Administration. What that is they were essentially created to help keep pilots and people that are even on the ground safe from people that are in the sky. The way that I think about the FAA is that they are the government of the sky. Yes, they are part of the government, and essentially the government already owns that airspace, but the FAA is what is able to regulate who goes up into the sky, what goes up into the sky, and how it goes up into the sky. One of the regulations that we will open up to is FAR 61103. And in a little paragraph down here, it says, in order to be eligible to get your private pilot's license, you need to already have one of three things. You need to be a student pilot, a sport pilot, or a recreational pilot. Now, most people probably watching this video, you probably have nothing right now. So that means you're either looking to get into flying, and so you want to know what your first steps are, or maybe you already have your student pilot's license and this video is just to help you. That's probably going to be the majority of you, like it was me when I was starting my training. So you're like, Aiden, I don't know which one to get. There's three of them. What do I do? Well, more than likely, if you're in that scenario, you're probably going to get your student pilot's license. Now, this is done by an authorized instructor. Now, this authorized instructor will basically look at you and, based on other regulations, is able to tell if you are able to become a student pilot. And then they do their whole thing on the FAA side with IACRA, is what they call it. We're not going to go into any of that today, but they'll sign up on some stuff and then you can get your student pilot certificate. What can I do with a student pilot license now? Well, there's a couple things. I am now able to fly an airplane, but it also has its limitations. There's a lot of limitations that go into that. Ones that we're not really going to cover today, but one of them is that you cannot carry passengers. Now you can go up with a certified flight instructor because he is going to be PIC, that stands for Pilot in Command, and he will be the sole manipulator of the flight controls, and that's how you're able to learn to become a private pilot as a student pilot. The other two are recreational and sport pilot, which we're also not going to be going into today, just because sake of time, as well as a majority of people probably don't have their recreational or sport pilot license. But now you're probably thinking, well, if I'm not going to be able to fly private jets anytime soon, and I also can already fly an airplane, what do I need to get my private pilot license for? Let's talk about the privileges and limitations of becoming a private pilot. So what can a private pilot do, and what can he not do? For this, we are going to look at FAR 61-113 in our book of regulations. So, the number one thing that you can now do as a private pilot is you can now carry passengers, which is the coolest thing ever. A lot of people get in the mindset that getting your private pilot license is officially making you a pilot. Technically, you're already a pilot because you have a student, recreational, or sport pilot, but that feeling of being a private pilot, especially for me, really made me feel like I was actually a pilot. Because now I can take my mom up into the sky and we can go somewhere. Or I can take my dad or my friends or my brother or whatever the case may be. Whereas before, I couldn't do that. And there was a lot of things that were leaving me on the ground. So, as a student pilot, you can't fly whenever you want. There's limitations that your instructor that gave you your student pilot license actually will put on your endorsement, saying when you can leave, if you can leave, or if you need to contact him before, or whatever the case may be. But now, as a private pilot, I can go take my mom, and we can go rent an airplane, and I can fly up in the sky. That's super awesome. I can now take passengers. Really feel like a real pilot. So that is going to be our biggest privilege that we can now do. But you also heard me say the word limitations. So what does that mean? What kind of limitations are surrounding a private pilot license? Well, 61-113 gives us all this information, but there's this really cool acronym that we get to use. And that's going to be the acronym P-Script. So these are both things that you sort of can do, but also really can't do. So the first one, the P, is going to stand for pro rata share. What does pro rata share mean? Well, a commercial pilot is somebody who is legally allowed to be paid for their flying. As a private pilot, fortunately, you can't do that. So if I decide to take my mom up and I only have my private pilot license, she can't pay for the flight. How does that work then? What does pro rata share mean? Pro rata share essentially means that I have to split evenly with my other passengers, and that is the most that they can pay. So, let's say I take my mom up in the sky, and for some reason the flight cost $400 in total. And this includes oil, fuel, hangar, the actual aircraft rental itself, and a couple other things that are actually in a regulation as well that we're not going to go into today. But let's say the total of everything, the sum of everything, cost $400. The most that my mom is allowed to pay is $200. That would be pro rata share. Split evenly. You cannot pay less than the pro rata share. And that again is in 61-113. You can use another example as well. Let's say I took my mom, my dad, and my brother up. So there's 4 of us total in the aircraft. The most that they can pay is pro rata share, so I can split it completely evenly amongst everyone. So instead of me having to pay $200, I can now only pay $100 because everyone else is paying $100. It's split completely evenly. That is pro rata share. But let's talk about some ways that, not necessarily getting around this, but that a regulation says that we can do with some limitations. The next letter in our acronym P-Script is the letter S, and this stands for salesman. Now, I've never heard personally of somebody going to get their private pilot license so that way they can be an aircraft salesman, but I know that it's happened before. If that's you, let me know down in the comments because I think that's really cool, and personally I've never heard of somebody doing that. But the regulation 61.113 says that you can become and be compensated for becoming an aircraft salesman, but you have to have at least 200 hours. So essentially what that means is if you have 200 hours and I'm trying to sell a Cessna 172 and the customer, of course, wants to know how that airplane flies, I can take them up, I can fly them around, bring it back down, and because I am on the clock at my job, whatever that is, being an aircraft salesman, I can be compensated for my time that I am working. Now, I'm not necessarily being paid to fly, but I am being compensated for my time that I am working, if that makes sense. The next letter in P-Script is going to be the letter C, and that stands for charity. So we can fly for charity events. And what that necessarily means is, if we think back to pro rata share, if the flight in total costs $200, normally I'd have to pay $100. And you're like, why would I have to pay $100 if I'm doing something for charity? That's where this part of the regulation comes in. You don't have to pay for the entire flight if it is for charity work. So essentially, you're just spending your time to go fly for charity, which is really cool. The next letter is going to be R, which stands for rescue. Sort of stands for search and rescue. Cool thing about this is you can search and rescue, but the limitation part of that is that you cannot rescue. You can only search, which is kind of interesting, but it's kind of how it works with this regulation stuff. Some things make sense, and 90% of the time they don't make sense, and so you need somebody to help explain things. The next letter is going to be I, which stands for incidental to the business. I'm not going to really go into this one super deep quite yet. This will be on a separate video, just because it's a little bit tricky to understand. So we're going to save that one for now. The next letter is going to be P, which stands for production test pilot. What is a production test pilot? These are probably one of the more brave pilots out there. Let's say Cessna comes out with a new aircraft, a new 172 that they need to test, hasn't had his first test flight yet. You, being a production test pilot, would be the pilot to test that new aircraft. The thing that is a little bit weird about this one is you need to have logged 100 hours of PIC. Let's move on to our last letter. That way we can hurry up and get through this acronym, and that is going to be the letter T. This letter stands for tow a glider. So as a private pilot, you can tow a glider. Now, there's a whole nother regulation if you want to do this that you can look at, and that is going to be FAR 6169. If you want to look more at that and see how you can become a pilot that is able to tow a glider, go ahead and go look at that regulation. Again, it's something that we're not fully going to cover today. So now we know what a private pilot can and can't do, the privileges and limitations of having your private pilot license. The biggest thing for this is you can now carry passengers, which is awesome. Now you're thinking, well, cool, Aiden. I kind of understand what a private pilot can and can't do. How do I get my private pilot's license then? I know I need to have a student pilot license at least, or a sport pilot, or a recreational pilot license, but how do I actually get my private pilot license? Well, of course, there's more regulations that cover this topic as well. The first one that we're going to be looking at is the eligibility to become a private pilot. So, now that you know what it is, are you even eligible to become a private pilot? We are going to be looking at FAR 61.103, and this is the regulation that covers the eligibility to become a private pilot. Now, there's a couple of things in this regulation that tell you what you need to have or be or need in order to become a private pilot. And they're kind of scattered throughout the entire regulation. And so I'm going to go ahead and do my best to kind of go through it, hit a couple of the topics, so that way you can sort of see if you're even eligible to become a private pilot. Number one, in order to get your private pilot's license, you need to be at least 17 years of age. Now, that means that you can do all of the training up into your check ride, and you can even take the check ride on your 17th birthday. The next thing is, if you're actually watching this video, listening to this video, and understanding what I'm saying, you're already eligible for the second part. And that is going to be read, write, and speak the English language fluently. Now, the FAA has deemed that the English language is universally accepted as the language for aviation. So, if you go to London and you're flying, the controller over the tower is going to be speaking to you in English. And you need to be able to understand that, and they need to be able to understand you, so that way the flying can be done safely. So, you need to be able to read, write, and speak the English language fluently. Next thing we already kind of talked about, you need to have either a sport pilot license, recreational pilot license, or a student pilot license. So we're not going to go over that again. The next thing after that is you need to have passed the written test. Now this written test is called the PAR, and there's different ways that you can study for this. You can use Sporties or you can use King School. I personally use King School because it was helping me to be able to learn. Now in order to take this test, you also need a logbook endorsement from an authorized instructor. Most of the time, these instructors will have you take practice tests until you get 390s in a row. And that's what I had to do. Once I got my 390s, then my instructor gave me my logbook endorsement, and then I was able to show that to the person who was administrating the exam, and then they were able to administer the exam to me. The last thing that you need to be eligible in order to take the check ride to get your private pilot license is an endorsement from your instructor saying that you are ready and able to take the check ride. Now that's more of a CFI stuff, but that's another thing that you need to be eligible to take the check ride to get your private pilot license. The last thing that we're going to be going over in this video is the aeronautical experience, or the hour requirements that you need to have actually flying the airplane in order to be eligible to take the check ride. Now in FAR 61109, it says that you need to have at least logged 40 hours of time, 20 of which need to be done with an authorized instructor, and 10 of which need to be solo. Essentially, what that means is 30 of your hours of the 40 need to be logged in that specific aircraft, and the other 10 can be logged in whatever. That 40 total is just flight time. You need to have 40 total of flight time, 20 of which needs to be with an instructor in that type of aircraft that you're trying to get your license in. Single engine land is what most people are going to be doing. And then the 10 need to be done solo. So where you're by yourself, flying with no instructor, nobody else in the cockpit but you. There's actually a little more that goes into that. So during the 20 hours that you're with your instructor, there's a lot that he actually needs to cover. And there's more regulation regarding what they need to actually cover in your training, but there's a little bit here in this regulation saying what you need. In this 20 hours, you need at least 3 hours of cross-country time, 3 hours of nighttime, 3 hours of simulated instrument time, 1 cross-country flight of more than 100 nautical miles, and 10 takeoffs and 10 landings at an airport. And you're like, where else would I do takeoff and landings at? But there's these crazy cool pilots called bush pilots that actually land on like rocks and beaches sometimes, which I think is awesome. I still have yet to do that, and I really want to do that, but those are not airports that they're landing at. So you cannot log those landings and takeoffs towards your private pilot license. Now let's talk about the 10 hours of solo time that you need to log. With this time, you need at least 5 hours of cross-country time, that is solo, 1 cross-country that is over 150 nautical miles, with landings to a full stop at 3 different airports, and one of those legs needs to be at least 50 nautical miles. Now you're like, what is a leg? A leg is essentially the distance between one airport and another. So for my solo time for that cross country, I actually flew in kind of like a triangle. So I took off from one airport, went and landed at another one, and that distance was over 50 nautical miles. Took off from that airport, landed at another one, and then took off from that airport and landed back at the original airport that I departed from. And these takeoff and landings need to be done to a full stop. There's no touch and goes. They need to be full stop, and then you can take off again. Different schools have different regulations for themselves on what they are willing to do. At the school that I went to, ATP, they actually had you fully stop, go through the entire thing back to the front of the runway, and then take off again. Some schools will let you stop on the runway if you have enough and then take off again. That can count too because you did come to a full stop. But a lot of schools actually don't let you do this just because it's a little bit more of a safety hazard. With that being said, that's pretty much what you need to be eligible to take the check ride as far as the flying goes. Now, for sake of time, That is what we are going to cover in today's video. And I know that I didn't hit every single topic, even in what I was trying to go over today. So, if you see anything that you would like me to go over or like to do more digging or research on, let me know in the comments, and I will do my best to come out with a video for you explaining those things. One of those being like incidental to the business. That one's a little bit hard to understand, and so I may go more in depth in a shorter, smaller video just for more people to be able to understand what that actually means, as well as let me know if there's different topics covering a private pilot that you would like me to go over. Now I have some videos planned in the future for different things I want to go over. I'm going to start trying to go through the ACS a little bit, so maybe things that you need to know knowledge-wise as a private pilot that your examiner is going to test you on when you're actually in the check ride. So some things like weather and airspace and things of that nature, I'm going to have their own dedicated videos towards. So be patient with me while I'm trying to get those videos out. But as far as today, that is all I'm going to be going over. Thank you for watching my video. Like, subscribe, it helps me out, and I will see you aviators in the next video.